You know, the human body is capable of doing some amazing things that no one ever thought was possible. So in this video, I'm going to count down 15 human abilities that scientists thought were impossible. Starting with number 15, echolocation in humans. For a long time, echolocation was thought to be a skill that was reserved for animals like bats and dolphins, creatures that navigate and hunt in total darkness using reflected sound waves. The idea that a human could do the same seems impossible until real-world examples proved otherwise. Individuals produce clicking sounds with their tongues, then listen to how those sounds bounce off nearby objects. By analyzing the echoes, they can detect obstacles, shapes, textures, and even the distance and density of objects around them. One of the most well-known examples is Daniel Kish, an American man who lost his sight as a baby due to retinoblastoma. Kish developed echolocation on his own as a child using tongue clicks to move around his environment. Today, he can ride a bike, hike, and navigate unfamiliar cities, all by using sound. Scientists who have studied Kish's brain activity found that his visual cortex becomes active while he uses echolocation. It's remarkable because it shows our brain's flexibility even without eyesight. It can repurpose the visual centers to process auditory information and build a kind of mental map of the surroundings. Researchers show that with enough practice, even people with normal vision can learn to use sound reflections to detect size, shape, and position of objects. However, blind individuals tend to be far better at it because they rely on this skill daily to develop it over years of practice. This echolocation for humans isn't really a mystical thing, it's rooted in physics and what's known as neuroplasticity. The clicks usually happen between 3 to 15 per second, and the echoes return within milliseconds, which allows a near-instant feedback. When analyzed under controlled conditions, echolocators can detect changes as subtle as a few centimeters in an object placement. While echolocation won't replace vision or allow people to see in the traditional sense, it is a powerful demonstration of how adaptable humans are. The only limitation is that it takes years of practice to master, and not everyone can reach the same level of proficiency. Still though, it is a real, measurable human skill that was once thought impossible. Now it's scientifically proven. Number 14. Voluntary control of your body temperature. In 1981, a group of researchers led by Dr. Herbert Benson from Harvard Medical School traveled to remote areas of northern India to study monks, who practiced a meditation technique called tumo. What they observed challenged their fundamental assumptions about human physiology. During the meditation, monks sitting in near-freezing temperatures were able to raise their body temperature dramatically, sometimes by as much as 17 degrees Fahrenheit, that's 9 Celsius, simply through breathing and mental focus. Tumo meditation is part of Tibetan Buddhist tradition. It combines deep breathing, visualization, and concentration. Practitioners describe the process as inner fire meditation, where they visualize a flame at the base of the spine and imagine it spreading warmth throughout the body. Physiologically, it involves a combination of controlled hyperventilation and muscle contractions that increase metabolism and circulation. To verify the claims, Benson's team used temperature sensors attached to the monks' fingers and toes. The readings confirmed that they were able to dry wet sheets placed on their bodies in a 40-degree Fahrenheit room. This level of thermal control defied what most scientists believed possible through mental effort alone. Normally, the body temperature is tightly regulated by the hypothalamus, and conscious influence over it was thought to be nearly impossible. Later studies provided further insight. In 2013, neuroscientist Maria Kozanovska and colleagues at the National University of Singapore published research showing that Western participants could learn to raise their core body temperature after weeks of this training. While only a small number of people can perform tumo at the level of trained monks, the ability is real and measurable. Tumo could lead to new therapies for temperature regulation disorders or even hypothermia prevention. There's still a bit of uncertainty about how much of the temperature rise comes from mental focus versus physical breathing effect, but the core discoveries are solid. The human mind can influence the body's automatic systems far more than we once believed. For centuries, it was assumed that the automatic nervous system, the system that controls things like the heart rate, digestion, and temperature, was entirely beyond our control. The tumo practitioners proved that assumption wrong, showing that the limits of human potential are not as fixed as we once thought. Number 13. Extreme pain tolerance. For most of modern medical history, pain was treated as a fixed biological response. Apply a stimulus and the nervous system reacts in a predictable way. The idea that humans could meaningfully suppress pain without drugs was largely dismissed. That view changed as researchers began studying individuals who could tolerate extreme physical discomfort under controlled conditions, not through injury or shock, but through deliberate mental and physiological training. One of the most studied examples involved control exposure to the cold. In laboratory settings, participants trained in specific breathing and focus techniques have been shown to endure ice water immersion far longer than untrained individuals. Pain ratings reported during these tests are significantly lower even when skin temperature and tissue stress is objectively the same. Functional MRI and PET scan studies conducted in Europe and the US have helped explain what's going on here. During intense pain exposure, trained individuals show reduced activity in the brain's pain processing region, including the insular cortex and anterior cingulate cortex. At the same time, there's increased activation in the regions associated with attention control and emotional regulation. This indicates that the pain signal is still being transmitted, but the brain is processing it differently. Importantly, this ability doesn't involve ignoring pain or blocking nerve signals. Instead, it reflects a shift in how the brain interprets sensory input. The pain is detected, but emotional and distressing components are dampened. This distinction matters because it shows that pain perception is not purely physical, it's deeply influenced by the cognitive process. Medical researchers have taken note. Pain management specialists now study these techniques for potential use in chronic pain therapy, burn recovery, and rehabilitation. And while these methods are not replacements for medical treatment, they do offer evidence that the human nervous system is a bit more adaptable than previously assumed. There are limits, though. Training doesn't make someone immune to injury, nor does it eliminate pain entirely. Tissue damage still happens, and pain still serves its protective role. What's changed is the understanding that pain tolerance is not fixed at birth. With structured training and repetition, you can significantly expand your ability to endure physical discomfort without pharmacological intervention. This ability was once thought impossible because it challenged a long-standing belief that pain response is automatic and uncontrollable. The scientific evidence is now in, and it shows that within limits, humans can consciously influence how pain is experienced. Number 12. Conscious control over heart rate variability. Heart rate. It was long considered a function governed almost entirely by the autonomic nervous system, operating outside conscious control. While people knew stress could increase heart rate, the idea that individuals could intentionally influence the rhythm patterns with precision was dismissed. That assumption began to change with advances in heart rate variability research. Heart rate variability, HRV, it measures small variations in time between heartbeats. Contrary to intuition, a healthy heart doesn't beat like a metronome. Greater variability is associated with better cardiovascular health, improved stress resilience, and a stronger nervous system balance. Low variability, by contrast, is linked to chronic stress and increased disease risk. Researchers discovered that slow, controlled breathing, typically around 6 breaths per minute, can dramatically increase HRV. This effect happens through stimulation of the vagus nerve, which plays a central role in regulating heart function. Using biofeedback equipment, scientists were able to show that participants could reliably enter a high HRV state within minutes simply by adjusting their breathing patterns. Participants trained in paced breathing showed improved autonomic balance, reduced anxiety markers, and measurable changes in heart rhythm. Importantly, these effects weren't subjective. They were recorded directly through ECG and HRV monitors. There are some boundaries here, though. Conscious control doesn't allow people to stop their heart or bypass normal cardiac regulation. The influence is modulatory, not absolute. Still, though, the discovery overturned fundamental assumptions about the limits of voluntary control over our internal physiology. It's another example of how the nervous system can be trained to operate in ways that challenge our traditional definitions of automatic bodily functions. Number 11. Deliberate expansion of human memory capacity. For centuries, extraordinary memory was treated as a rare talent that only a few people were born with. Individuals who could recite long texts or remember thousands of details were assumed to possess unusual brains. That belief changed once researchers began systematically studying competitive memorizers and testing whether their abilities could be taught. Modern memory research shows that exceptional recall isn't the result of a larger brain or unique anatomy. Instead, it relies on a learned strategy that reorganizes how information is stored and retrieved. The most important of these strategies is the method of loci, a technique with roots in ancient Greece. It involves in mentally placing information along a familiar spatial route like a room in a house or landmark along a walk, and then recalling those locations to retrieve the information. Neuroscientists at institutions like Stanford University conducted brain imaging studies comparing memory champions with average adults. They found no structural difference in the brain of elite memorizers. Instead, the key difference was activation patterns. Memory athletes consistently activated regions involved in spatial navigation, particularly in areas within the hippocampus. In contrast, untrained people relied on short-term memory systems that quickly became overloaded. In one widely cited study, researchers trained ordinary university students in memory techniques for 6 weeks. After training, participants showed dramatic improvements. Many could memorize lists of up to 60 to 80 random words in order, a task that most people struggle to complete with more than 10 items. What makes this ability remarkable is that memory limits were once believed to be biologically fixed. Research now shows that that limit applies to only untrained recall. With structured encoding strategies, long-term memory capacity becomes the primary storage system, and its limits are far greater. There are still constraints, though. The techniques require focus, time, and practice, and they're less effective for abstract or emotionally neutral information without deliberate encoding. Memory athletes also report that recall fades without reinforcement, just like any learned skill. This ability does not rely on unusual genetics or unverified claims. It's a repeatable skill, and it's grounded in neuroscience and cognitive psychology. And it's continuing to reshape how educators and researchers understand human memory. Number 10. Extreme breath holding. For much of the 20th century, it was widely believed that humans couldn't safely hold their breath for more than a few minutes. Brain damage and loss of consciousness were assumed to be unavoidable beyond that point. This assumption was overturned by research into freediving, a discipline in which individuals dive underwater on a single breath without a breathing apparatus. Modern records show that trained humans can remain without breathing far longer than once believed. In controlled settings, using oxygen beforehand, individuals have exceeded 20 minutes of breath holding. Even without supplemental oxygen, trained freedivers regularly surpass 5 minutes, and some approach 10 minutes under supervision. Physiological research explains how this is possible. Breath hold training strengthens the mammalian dive reflex. This is an automatic response that slows down the heart rate, constricts blood vessels in the limbs, and prioritizes oxygen delivery to the brain and heart. This reflex is present in all humans, but it becomes far more pronounced when training it. Studies conducted by European sports physiology labs have measured heart rates dropping below 30 beats a minute during deep breath hold dives. Blood oxygen levels fall slowly and predictable, while the body conserves oxygen by reducing unnecessary muscle activity. Trained divers can develop higher tolerance to carbon dioxide buildup, which is normally what triggers the urge to breathe. One of the most documented figures in this field is Herbert Nietzsche, whose dives and breath hold performances have been extensively studied. Data from these events contributed to a better understanding of hypoxia tolerance and oxygen conservation in humans. Understanding how the body tolerates this low oxygen has implications for emergency medicine, stroke research, and high-altitude adaptation. Some studies do suggest that controlled hypoxic exposure may trigger protective cellular responses, though this area is still under investigation and not fully understood. Humans were thought to have a narrow, non-negotiable survival window without breathing. Observation now shows that that window is a bit more flexible within well-defined physiological limits. While not everyone can reach these free-diving levels, the core finding is verifiable. With training, the human body can safely tolerate breath-holding durations that were once considered impossible. Number 9. Super recognizers. For most of the 20th century, face recognition was assumed to be a uniform human ability with only minor variation. People were thought to differ slightly in how well they remembered faces, but no one suspected that some individuals possessed dramatically superior recognition skills. That assumption changed in the early 2000s when cognitive psychologists began documenting a small group of people who could recognize faces with extraordinary accuracy. These individuals are now known as super recognizers. Unlike artists or people with good general memory, super recognizers excel at one specific task, identifying faces. They can recognize a person seen only once, years earlier, from a low-quality image, a partial profile, or even an unexpected angle. Controlled testing has consistently shown that super recognizers perform far above the population average on these standardized face recognition tasks. The phenomenon was first formally studied by researchers at University College London, particularly in the work of Josh Davis. Davis and his colleagues developed testing protocols to separate true super recognizers from people who merely believed they were good with faces. In these tests, super recognizers score at the extreme upper end of accuracy, often outperforming computer-based facial recognition systems in real-world conditions. Unlike memory techniques that can be learned, this one appears to be largely innate. Training can improve performance somewhat, but it doesn't transform average individuals into super recognizers. However, its existence still overturned a major assumption that face recognition ability was relatively fixed and narrowly distributed across humans. This discovery had immediate real-world consequences. Police forces in the United Kingdom, Australia, and other countries now formally recruit super recognizers for surveillance analysis and suspect identification. Studies compared trained officers with super recognizers show that the latter make significantly fewer false identifications, even under difficult conditions like low-resolution video or crowded environments. Super recognizers, though, are not infallible, and researchers emphasize the need for controlled verification before relying on their judgment in legal contexts. Environmental factors, lighting, disguise, and image quality still matter. Nevertheless, error rates remain substantially lower than average for these people. Number 8. Voluntary activation of the immune response. For most of medical history, the immune system was considered entirely autonomous. While stress was known to affect health, the idea that humans could consciously influence immune function was viewed as implausible. That belief changed following a series of controlled experiments that showed measurable immune modulation through deliberate mental techniques. One of the most influential studies was conducted in 2014 by researchers at Radboud University Medical Center in the Netherlands. The study examined participants trained in specific breathing exercises, cold exposure, and focused mental technique. These methods were associated with Wim Hof, though the study itself was conducted independently under strict lab conditions. Participants were injected with a small, harmless dose of bacterial endotoxin, a standard method used to trigger a controlled immune response. Normally, this will cause flu-like symptoms and a predictable inflammatory reaction. However, the trained participants showed significantly reduced inflammatory markers and reported fewer symptoms compared to the untrained control subject. Blood analysis revealed elevated levels of epinephrine in the trained group, which in turn suppressed the release of pro-inflammatory cytokines. This showed a direct pathway by which voluntary actions, specifically breathing patterns and mental focus, could influence immune signaling. Now, this mechanism involved known physiological processes, activation of the sympathetic nervous system, and hormonal signaling that modulates the immune system. What changed was the recognition that these systems could be voluntarily engaged to a meaningful degree. Now, researchers emphasized the boundaries of the effect. The immune system was not turned off, nor could participants prevent infection or disease. The modulation was partial and context-specific. Still, the results overturned long-standing assumptions that immune responses were completely beyond conscious influence. Humans were once thought incapable of consciously influencing immune function. Controlled research now shows that limited, voluntary immune modulation is real, repeatable, and it's grounded in established biology. This discovery, though, continues to reshape how medicine understands the relationship between our brain and immune system. It's revealing the line between voluntary and involuntarily bodily functions is less rigid than we thought. Moving on to number 7, voluntary control of goosebumps. For most of recorded medical history, goosebumps were considered a purely automatic reflex. Cold temperatures, strong emotions, or fear would trigger the tiny muscles at the base of a hair follicle, causing the skin to ripple, and this reaction is known as piloerection. It was controlled by the autonomic nervous system and was believed to be completely involuntary. That assumption changed in 2018 when researchers published the first verified evidence that some people can deliberately produce goosebumps at will. The discovery came from a neuroscience study led by researchers at University of Queensland. Participants who reported the unusual ability consciously to raise goosebumps were brought in to laboratory conditions and monitored. High-resolution video, skin conductance measurements, and physiological monitoring confirmed that the reaction was real and not caused by temperature change, emotional imagery, or muscle tensing. The participants could reliably trigger goosebumps within seconds without imagining any emotional scenario or inducing chills. Importantly, the response occurred without any significant change in heart rate or breathing either. It indicated that it wasn't a byproduct of general arousal. Follow-up testing showed that this ability appears to be innate rather than learned. Participants reported having it for as long as they could remember, and attempts to teach the ability to others were unsuccessful, and that distinguishes it from trainable autonomic skills like breathing control or heart rate variability. The findings, though, have implications for neuroscience, particularly in understanding how voluntary and involuntary systems are overlapping. It could be that the boundary between conscious and automatic control is a bit more flexible than previously thought, even in systems traditionally considered inaccessible. Scientists do not yet know why some individuals can access that control and while most can't. However, the phenomenon itself is no longer in doubt. It's been observed, measured, and verified. But what makes it cool is not the physical effect itself, but what it represents. Humans were believed incapable of consciously triggering this reflex, and carefully conducted research now shows that in a small number of people that belief was incorrect. Number 6. Human tolerance to extreme G-forces through training. For much of aviation history, scientists have believed that the human body had a strict, non-negotiable limit when it came to acceleration. High gravitational forces, or G-forces, caused blood to pool away from the brain, leading to a loss of vision and eventually a loss of consciousness. Early estimates suggest that humans couldn't tolerate more than 4 to 5 Gs without blacking out. Modern aerospace medicine have proven that assumption wrong. Today, trained fighter pilots routinely endure sustained forces of 9 Gs during aerial maneuvers, levels high enough they were once considered impossible for a conscious human. It's not achieved through technology alone. It does depend heavily on physical conditioning, breathing techniques, and a specialized muscle control. The key factor is something called the anti-G straining maneuver, or AGSM. Pilots learn to rhythmically tense the muscles in their legs, abdomen, and core while using a precise breathing pattern to maintain blood pressure in the brain. This prevents cerebral hypoxia and delays a loss of consciousness. Medical studies conducted by air forces and aerospace tech centers show that untrained people often lose consciousness at 4 to 5 Gs. Trained pilots, by contrast, can remain conscious at nearly double that. Centrifuge testing, where pilots are placed in rotating arms that simulate the extreme acceleration, provides some direct measurements on confirming the effect. There are specialized flight suits that also contribute by mechanically squeezing the lower body, but they're not sufficient on their own. Without proper training, pilots wearing modern G-suits still experience vision loss and blackout. The human component is essential. But the ability has clear limits. Even the best trained pilots can't withstand extreme forces indefinitely, and sudden spikes in acceleration can still overwhelm the body. Loss of consciousness remains a serious risk, and strict safety protocols govern the exposure of it. Nevertheless, the broader conclusion is well established. Humans are capable of tolerating acceleration forces that were once believed to be universally incapacitating. What was once thought to be a hard biological ceiling turned out to be a flexible threshold. With training and technique, humans can function under physical forces that earlier generations of scientists believed it were impossible to survive while conscious. Number 5. Ultra endurance, running extreme distances. For much of modern history, it was assumed that the human body had strict limits on how far it could run. Distances beyond a marathon were thought to cause inevitable muscle breakdown, organ failure, or a collapse. Early medical models suggest that sustained running over hundreds of kilometers was incompatible with human physiology. Real-world evidence has since overturned that belief. Ultra-endurance running refers to races that are longer than the standard marathon distance of 42.2 kilometers. These events range from 50 to 100 miles and beyond, often taking place over mountain terrain, deserts, and extreme heat. Races like the Badwater 135 in California require participants to run 135 miles through Death Valley, where daytime temperatures regularly exceed 45 Celsius, that's 113 Fahrenheit. Studies conducted at European and North American sports science institutions have measured stable kidney function, manageable muscle damage, and controlled inflammation in trained runners, even after distances exceeding 160 kilometers. The key of all this lies in our evolutionary physiology. Humans evolved as persistence hunters, capable of long-distance travel in a hot environment. Unlike most mammals, humans cool themselves through sweating rather than panting, allowing heat dissipation while running. Additionally, the human musculoskeletal system, particularly long Achilles tendons and spring-like foot arches, store and release energy efficiently during a repetitive motion. Research published in journals shows that trained ultra-runners operate at a relatively low intensity, typically 50 to 65% of maximum aerobic capacity. And this allows fat metabolism to dominate energy production and preserve limited glycogen stores. The blood glucose, hydration levels, and electrolyte balance are all carefully managed, but the underlying capacity is biological, not technological. There are limits, of course. Extreme endurance running causes temporary immune suppression, muscle fiber damage, and hormonal changes. Recovery can take weeks, however, long-term studies don't show inevitable organ failure in trained individuals. Thousands of runners now compete ultramarathons worldwide under medical observation without any catastrophic outcomes. The assumption that humans were biomechanically unsuited for this extreme endurance has been replaced with a clearer picture. Endurance is one of the defining strengths of the human species. Number 4. Tetrachromatic color vision in humans. For decades, it was taught that humans can only see in 3 primary color channels, red, green, and blue, processed by 3 types of cone cells in the retina. This trichromatic model was considered universal. The idea that humans could naturally perceive more colors than this was dismissed as biologically impossible. That assumption turned out to be incomplete. A small percentage of humans, primarily women, possess a 4th type of cone cell in their retinas. This condition is known as tetrachromacy. It's unlike standard vision, which distinguishes colors by combining signals from the 3 cone types. Tetrachromats can theoretically perceive a much wider range of color differences. The biological mechanism of this is well understood. Tetrachromacy arises from genetic variations on the X chromosome that affects photopigments, and because women have 2 X chromosomes, they're more than likely to carry multiple cone variants. Men with only 1 X chromosome are far less likely to develop the trait. Neuroscientists emphasize that having 4 cone types doesn't automatically guarantee enhanced color perception. The brain has to process the additional signals. Some individuals possess the retinal hardware without the neural processing advantage. However, a subset demonstrably perceives color differences that others can't. Tetrachromats cannot see ultraviolet light or invisible wavelengths. The difference lies within the visible spectrum, where they can detect finer gradations between the hues like reds, greens, and yellows. Human color perception was believed to have a hard upper limit. Genetic and perceptual testing now shows that the limit is flexible in rare cases. But the broader implication is clear. Even in basic senses like sight, human capability is more variable than once believed. Tetrachromatic vision now stands as an example of human sensory ability that science once considered impossible, but now recognizes as part of a natural biological diversity. Number 3. Voluntary control of sweating through biofeedback. For much of the 20th century, sweating was considered fully automatic as a bodily response. Controlled by the autonomic nervous system, it was once thought to be triggered only by heat, physical exertion, or emotional stress. This assumption changed with the development of biofeedback research. Sweating is regulated by sweat glands, which respond to signals from the sympathetic nervous system. These signals can be measured electrically through changes in skin conductance, which is a metric known as electrodermal activity. Beginning in the 1960s and 70s, researchers discovered that when people were given real-time feedback about their skin conductance, some could learn to increase or decrease it voluntarily. In controlled lab settings, participants were connected to sensors that measured the minute changes in skin moisture, often on the palms or fingertips. These signals were displayed visually or audibly, allowing participants to observe their response in real time. Over repeated sessions, many people learned to reliably alter their sweating level without changing temperature, movement, or emotional state. Crucially, this wasn't a placebo effect. Objective measurements confirmed real changes in the sweat gland activity. The ability even persisted when feedback was removed, showing that a learned physiological control had developed. While individuals aren't consciously commanding sweat glands, they're learning to activate or suppress the sympathetic activity through focused attention. Brain imaging studies show involvement of areas linked to emotional regulation rather than any motor control. This biofeedback-based sweat control is now used clinically for conditions like hyperhidrosis, where excess sweating interferes with daily life, and it's also been applied in anxiety treatment, as sweating is closely tied to a stress response. The limits are well defined, though. People can't completely shut down sweating, nor can they prevent it under extreme heat or exertion. The control is partial and context-dependent, and training requires time and consistent feedback. Not everyone can achieve the same level of control. But this ability has showed that even deeply automatic physiological processes can become accessible to our conscious regulation under the right conditions, and this has reshaped how scientists understand the boundary between voluntary and involuntary functions in our bodies. Number 2. Hyperphantasia, exceptionally vivid mental imagery. For decades, mental imagery was assumed to function similarly across all humans. People were thought to imagine objects, scenes, and faces with roughly comparable clarity. Differences were considered subjective rather than biological. This view began to change when researchers identified individuals whose mental imagery was dramatically more vivid than average. This condition is known as hyperphantasia. People with hyperphantasia can visualize scenes with extraordinary detail, including precise colors, textures, lightings, and spatial depth. When asked to imagine a familiar place, they often report seeing it as vividly as a real photograph. These experiences are not metaphorical descriptions, they do correlate with measurable differences in brain activity. Studies conducted at institutions including the University of Exeter showed that imagery ability exists on a wide spectrum rather than being uniform. Functional MRI studies revealed that individuals with hyperphantasia show stronger activation in the visual processing region. These activity patterns overlap with those observed during actual perception, explaining why the imagery feels so real. Most individuals who experience it, though, have reported having vivid imagery for as long as they can remember. Attempts to teach average individuals to reach comparable levels of imagery vividness have not been successful, which suggests a biological basis. Researchers do distinguish hyperphantasia from hallucination or fantasy. People with hyperphantasia retain full awareness that their imagery is internally generated. These images don't intrude into perception or impair reality testing. This separation is critical in clinical assessment. There are some drawbacks, though. Highly vivid imagery has been associated in some cases with intrusive memories or heightened susceptibility to anxiety, particularly when recalling a negative experience. Researchers stress that hyperphantasia is not inherently beneficial or harmful, it's simply a cognitive variation. This ability shows how internal experiences, long dismissed as subjective, can show genuine neurological differences. Hyperphantasia is a clear example of a human cognitive ability that science once underestimated, but it now recognizes as part of normal biological diversity. Number 1. The human brain rewiring itself after losing an entire hemisphere. For most of modern neuroscience, it was considered impossible for a human being to function normally after losing half of their brain. The cerebral hemispheres were thought to be highly specialized, with critical functions rigidly localized to specific regions. Language, motor control, spatial reasoning, and sensory processing were believed to depend on fixed neural real estate. Remove an entire hemisphere and the assumption was clear: permanent, severe disability was unavoidable. The most amazing evidence comes from patients who have undergone a procedure known as Hemispherectomy. This is a radical neurosurgical operation in which one cerebral hemisphere is either removed or functionally disconnected from the rest of the brain. This procedure is not experimental either. It's been performed for decades as a last resort treatment for catastrophic epilepsy that can't be controlled by medication. Children who undergo hemispherectomy often suffer from hundreds of seizures per day before surgery. These seizures can be life-threatening, and when surgery is successful, the seizures are dramatically reduced or limited. Many patients, particularly those operated on in early childhood, recover abilities that shouldn't be possible with only half a brain. In documented cases, children who lost their left hemisphere, the side traditionally associated with language, relearn to speak fluently. Others regain the ability to walk, run, read, and attend regular school. Some grew up to live independently, hold jobs, and participate fully in daily life. Neuroimaging provided the explanation. The remaining hemisphere had reorganized itself to take over the functions once believed to be permanently lost. Motor control pathways rewired to compensate for missing structures, sensory processing adapted to work with reduced input, and the phenomenon is known now as extreme neuroplasticity. The implications of all this extend far beyond epilepsy surgery. Understanding how the brain adapts after a hemispherectomy has influenced stroke rehabilitation, traumatic brain injury therapy, and even childhood neurodevelopment research. Therapies now focus more on encouraging reorganization rather than merely compensating for a loss. But the central fact remains undeniable. Humans can retain and even rebuild core cognitive abilities after losing an entire cerebral hemisphere, which is an outcome that was once thought impossible under any circumstance. Among all the abilities on this list, this one has reshaped neuroscience at its foundation. It forced scientists to abandon rigid models of brain localization and adapt a more dynamic, adaptive view of human cognition. The brain is not a static machine with fixed parts. It's a living system that's capable of reconfiguring itself in ways that earlier generations of scientists never believed possible.